Hello, this is Jose Luis here at Parametric Camp and welcome to another video in our mini-series Fun with Dall-E. In this video, I would like to show you how to create a full web app that you can use to interface with the Dall-E API and create your own images. So for example, here I have this text box, an isometric view of a miniature city, one image, small size, and I'm going to request. The request is processing right now, and as soon as that's going to be done, it takes a few seconds, then I get the resulting image right here. This is great because in the previous videos, I've shown you how to basically do the same thing, but using either Python, Node.js, or Grasshopper, which are arguably very good and very powerful tools that use the backend API using post requests as we have seen before. But it turns out that doing that, maybe for us who are computational designers, it might be okay, but if we want to allow other people to do this in a more UI-friendly way, these tools are probably not the best ones. And that's also the reason why, for example, OpenAI themselves created this AI Dall-E app where you can type something here and then you get a result. So I'm actually going to copy this here and I'm going to get the result right. And then you generate, but they provide this in a very UI-friendly web-based way. And this is so because web is one of the most democratic mediums these days. So creating some kind of web app that uses the technologies that we've done before, and you're going to see that the code is actually very, very similar to the Node.js example. We're going to do a request body, parameters, and use the fetch API. It's just that we're going to have to do a little bit of DOM manipulation to figure out how to retrieve text from these UI elements, how to make the button work, etc., etc. But it's going to be super fun. And now you can actually, if you upload this to some kind of hosting or some kind of domain, like a website that you own, in this case, for this video, I uploaded to parametric.camp/Dall-E. Or, for example, if you were using GitHub pages, you could probably upload this to your GitHub page, right? By doing that, you can provide a link to anyone, and then anyone can do this. I'm actually, hopefully, I'm going to provide my nephews and my nieces with a link so they can use this on their own. Okay, so this is great. It's going to be super easy. It's going to be a translation of the Node.js version of what we did in the previous video, and it's going to be also a way to speed you up through the process of creating simple interactive web applications. Okay, so less talking and more text to image. Is that what we do? Let's get hands-on and learn how to do a web app that pings the Dall-E API and that allows us to do text to image generation on our own. Let's see what that looks like. Fantastic. So let's get started. How are we going to do this? Well, we haven't done a lot of HTML and CSS or like web programming in this channel so far. So I guess it's a good moment to start. It's never too late. So I'm going to assume for this video that you're somehow familiar with creating simple websites. So simple HTML, simple CSS. If you're not, I really recommend you take some class or you just slow down this video so that you can see what I'm doing in a more paced way, because I'm going to skip a little fast through the creation of the scaffolding of the web app and focus on the interactivity and the JavaScript and the connection and making it work. Okay, so how are we going to do this? Well, I'm going to start a folder here. It's just going to be an empty folder, and in the empty folder I'm going to start and create, for example, a new document that is going to be the index.html page, and I would like that to be the root of the web app that I'm going to be building. I'm also going to create a CSS folder, and I'm going to create a JS folder where I will include files. For example, in the JS folder, I'm going to create a new empty file that I'm going to call script.js, and I'm going to remove and here I'm actually going to copy some CSS from a previous project from a previous example that I've done offline. So I'm going to copy a file here called styles.css. We're going to see it in a second. I really don't want to redo this again. And then I'm going to drop this folder in Visual Studio Code. Okay, so now you can see that my index file is empty. You can see that my JavaScript file is also empty. And you can see that my CSS file does have a little bit of like a font weight, a margin, things that you can copy if you're interested. You can copy for your own project. All right. And I'm going to scroll this a little bit over here. Okay. So that you have a bit more space. And then what am I going to do? Well, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to create the simplest website ever. So that's going to be, I'm going to create a doc type, and then I'm going to say, I'm going to write some HTML tag here that I'm going to open and close. I'm going to create the header block, and then I'm going to create the body block, right? And then for the header, I'm just going to add a title, which is going to be, for example, Dall-E web app, for example. And I'm not going to bother a lot with much stuff, but I'm going to link the styles. So I'm going of the file that I just saw, link, and then I want the rel, and then I want the style sheet. I'm not. And so what I'm doing right now is that I'm linking the CSS file that I just copy pasted, and then I'm adding here the href, which is going to be CSS / and then style. Okay, and then I'm going to close this, and with that, and here I'm going to write something like, for example, a paragraph where I'm going to say custom Dall-E web app, a custom OpenAI web app for Dall-E, for example. Okay, beautiful. And if I do that, I should already have a basic index HTML. I could already open Chrome, excuse me, I could already open Chrome, drop this file and see that I already have something. So I have the paragraph that I created, but the paragraph is styled because I chose Courier New, monospace, etc. So it has a little bit of a style to it, okay? However, if I did that and I now change things here, I will need to always manually reload here, which is kind of not great. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this extension that I already downloaded. It is called Live Reload, I think it's called. Live Server. It's called Live Server. I already installed this. I recommend you all to install it in your... And when I do this, I'm going to get this button here that is going to allow me, you see that button there? It's going to allow me to go live and create a server that is serving whichever files I have here. So I'm going to make that, and then what that makes is that it opens up this local server at 127.0.0.1 index.html. It's rendering the exact same thing, but you can see that if I now change something and I save my file, Control S, the live server has automatically reloaded the page, which is very nice for development. So it's going to make it very easy for me to just make changes here and see the changes right away on Chrome. All right. And just for the sake of it, because we will use this very soon, I'm going to open here developer tools so that in the background before I can see the console. Okay, because the next thing that I want to do is to actually add some functionality here. So at the very end of the body, what I would like to do is I would like to add a script, which is going to be of the type text.javascript, etc. Okay, and then the source is going to be, I always get confused. The source is going to be in the folder that I just created, the script file. Okay, beautiful. So now that gets loaded, but nothing happens. And then as I open my script, what I can do is just, I can simple console log something like hello Dall-E. This is just to make sure that the script is being loaded. And you can see that I get in the console here. Can I open the console? Yeah. Can I make the console bigger? Yes. So I can see that I get a message here, and let's write some code, and then I save this, and then things get reloaded. So I do have my development environment and my basic website just set up here. Again, I'm not going to cover a little bit too much the details of this. If you want to learn more about how to create HTML and CSS, there's a lot of resources open over there. So I would like to focus now on building some kind of interface here for our web app and then making it work. If you remember from our previous videos, when we were looking at how to generate images with the API, what we did was we went to documentation, we check out what is the endpoint that we need to post a request to, but we also learned that the request needs to have these kind of parameters. What is the text input, how many images do we want, and the size. So because we're creating a web app now, what we want to do is make it easier for people. And as opposed to having to type in a terminal, like a command with options, etc., we just want to make an interface to allow people to customize all of this. So what we're going to build is a simple web interface that gives us the option to, excuse me, to enter like a bunch of text, for example. That's going to be the text prompt that allows us to enter a number, right? Or that allows us to enter some kind of choice between a set of options like 256, 512, or 124, because the user will not be able to freely choose a size. It has to be one of these three, right? So we will have to look for interface elements that will allow this kind of optionality, all right? Okay, so what is that going to look like? So what I'm going to do is in the HTML, I'm basically going to add a bunch of UI elements to allow text input, to allow number input, and to allow choosing between different options. So let me start with that. So I'm going to start, for example, with the text prompt. That's going to be an element of the type text area, all right? And if you are familiar with HTML, or if you just don't want to bother looking at me how I write all this HTML, etc., you're welcome to fast forward to the next section in this video. The sections are going to be somewhere in the description, I think, where I'm going to explain, I'm going to go straight to the JavaScript and the functionality, okay? You can also download the sample files from the link in the description, and then just look at the HTML and CSS directly and work on the JavaScript together with me, okay? So I'm going to create a text area. I'm going to give it an ID. For example, I'm going to call this a text prompt because I will need that ID to target this DOM element so that I can read its values and send them to the API, okay? So I'm going to say, for example, this is going to have 4 rows, and then I'm going to say that the columns are going to be, for example, 52, okay? And then I'm going to input here some default value for the text area, for the prompt, okay? So that's going to be, for example, what have we done in the past? An isometric view of a miniature city, comma, tilt, shift, bouquet. Have I written that correctly? Voxel, V-Ray render, high detail, or something like that. It was something like that, right? So if I do this, now I do have a text box where I can input text, all right? The next thing is going to be, for example, we need numerical input. How many images are we going to generate? That is going to be a text box. So I'm going to say, for example, image count from 1 to 4. And that's going to be, for example, and that I'm going to say here an input. The ID is going to be, for example, image count, correct? And then the default value is going to be 1. That's what we want, okay? Beautiful. I'm going to save this, and you can see that what starts happening is that all the DOM elements start like piling on top of each other of sorts, which is not nice. I probably want this to be on the next line. So a very common trick is to create divisions in your HTML so that everything is on a division of sorts. So for example, for the text area, I probably want a div here, all right? And then I want to move this inside of the div. And then for this, sorry, I'm typing. And for this, same thing. I also want a division, and I want to move this all the way here. And if I save this, now I have everything stacked up very nicely. We're going to make this a little nicer. Don't worry about that. So we're going to keep doing this. So I'm going to create another division here. And then what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pile here a bunch of inputs to choose from the different sizes. We have 256, 512, and 1024. So because it's going to be choosing from one of those, we could either do a drop down or we could do like radio buttons. Radio buttons are a bit more default, a bit easier than drop downs. For drop downs, you have to get into CSS rules and stuff. It's not so straightforward. So I'm going to say, for example, I want image size, and so that's going to be a div, and then another div is going to be, for example, the first radio button. So that's going to look like an input, and the type here is going to be radio. Okay, we have to give it an ID. So this particular one is going to be, for example, what is it going to be? Radio 256. Okay, then we're going to give it a name. So all the radio buttons need to have the same name so that the DOM knows that they're all part of the same radio list, right? So I'm going to call this image size. And then the value that this one is going to get is going to be 256. So the value that we're going to read when we read value from the element. And this one is going to be checked. It's going to start as the default one, correct? So that's going to be that. And then the label that we want for this input is going to be, the label is going to be 256. And we're going to call this 256. Let's see if this works. I'm going to save this here, and yes, for image size, now we have an option here. So I'm going to copy and paste this, and now I'm going to replace all of this. The 256, I'm going to replace them with 512, and I'm going to remove the checked property. I'm going to save this. All right, so we have a second element, and I'm going to create the third one where I'm going to replace this by 124. I'm pressing Ctrl H to replace, and I'm pressing replace, 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 and replace. Okay, and I'm going to save this, and here we go. We have now the selectors for the image size. Beautiful. And I think this should be enough as input information. Actually, that's not enough because we do need the API key. I'm not going to, in this case, because I'm writing a web app, unless I write a server that has a variable in the server, and then I do server and client communication, which is kind of a little complicated. It's over the scope of this. Unless I do that, I can't really hide the API key. And if I hard code it in the JavaScript, then I'm basically sharing it because everyone can see the JavaScript of any file if you just look at your inspector. So what I'm going to do instead is, instead of just having a default API, what I'm going to make is a text box for people to come in with their own APIs and use their own money to use this app. So I'm going to create here another div. And then here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, for example, what am I going to do? It's going to be a please enter your API key, right? And your OpenAI of AI key. And then this is going to be some kind of input. Yes, the ID is going to be API key. And then the value is going to be, I should put my API key here for development because otherwise it's going to take, yeah, I should probably do that. So I'm going to put, what I would do is write some default value here. Yes, so I would do that. API key value. And then we can add this later just for development, okay? And because we do have a video, where do we have the video? Because we do have a video on how to get your, I'm going to reference this video. Why not? And without, okay, here I'm going to reference the video, right? So I'm going to do here, this is going to be wrapped in an A tag. I'm going to wrap this in an A tag, okay? And this is going to close here. And then here, this is going to be the href is going to be that link. And then the target is going to be blank so that it opens in a new. If I do that, now I have a link here and I click and you can see I go to the video where I just explain how to get the API key, which is kind of nice. All right. Beautiful. We are there. This is not looking great, but don't worry. We will improve that in a second, okay? So what's the next thing? Once I have this, I probably want a button to make the actual request, correct? So I'm going to take a moment here and I'm going to add a div, and then in the div I'm going to make a button element, and the button element is going to have an ID, which is going to be, for example, button request, and then here I'm going to write request. Okay, and now I have a button which, if I click, it's not doing anything because it's just any you couldn't see, sorry, you couldn't see that. It's a button there. If I click it, it's nothing because I still haven't attached any behavior. And okay, so that's good as an interface, I think, to start with. We're gonna need a couple more things, but before that, I'm not loving how this is looking so far, so I think I'm going to try to put some order in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sections for this stuff. So for example, all of this is kind of the data for the request. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap all of this into what's called a field set, which, if I move all of this inside the field set and I write a legend for the field set and I say, for example, request parameters or prompt parameters or request parameters, right? So what that's going to do is going to create this pseudo nice box that is going to wrap all things, and it's going to give me a legend here. So I'm going to do that also here for the field set. I'm going to push all of this inside and I'm going to write a legend here, which is going to be something like, for example, setup. And now I have the setup here. Things are looking a little nicer now. Okay. And then I'm going to go all the way here and I'm going to create another field set, and the legend is going to be, what is it going to be? The legend is going to be, for example, request status. So I'm going to create here something where I can see and display some text about what's going on with the, so I'm going to create, for example, a division here. And then I'm going to make a paragraph with an ID of, for example, request status. And I'm going to add some text here, which is going to be, for example, no request performed yet. All right. So what I will do is, whenever I make requests, I will go to this element and change the text here to show like, hey, this is happening, something is going on, did I get an error, did I not get an error, etc., to give some feedback to the user. And then the last thing, probably, that I want is the actual images, right? So for example, I'm going to create a box here where I'm going to make, for example, images, and then I'm going to create an empty container. And this container is going to be where the images are going to be added. So response images will be added here. Okay. And then there, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create an empty container, which is going to have some kind of ID. So for example, here, the image container. All right. And this is going to be empty. It's going to have nothing, but I'm just going to leave it there so that I know I have a target. So where I want to add stuff to. And all right, and this is empty now. So I think with this, we have enough of a scaffolding of inputs and UI elements to start with that now we can add functionality to. Okay, so I know that was a little fast and a little quick, but again, I find HTML a little boring. I don't know. So I just wanted to get it out of the way. And also, of course, if you're a CSS ninja, you can probably start writing very beautiful CSS rules to make these nice background colors, make things align, optimize for mobile. But I'm not that person. I hate CSS. I find it, I don't know. I hate a lot of things, but CSS and Python, perhaps. I don't really hate Python. That's a long story. Let's not get there. Anyway, CSS, not my favorite thing. So you can you can see this is the basic scaffolding, basic web app, all the inputs, all the elements. None of them actually work. They don't do anything, but that's what we're going to do in the next section. So in the next section, we're going to add behavior to these elements, and we're going to use them to actually query the OpenAI API and get images from Dall-E. Great. So if you skipped through the HTML and CSS section, just as a summary, we just built a bunch of HTML, UI elements and placeholders for all the stuff that we're going to need to input and to feed to the model as information, okay? And now what we're going to do is we're going to actually make this work. Because right now, we do have a script that has been attached, a JavaScript script that has been attached to the website, and that it has like this really simple console dump. So when I change something here and I save, you see that in the console I get some information, which is basically saying that this works, right? So what I would like to do now is I would like to use JavaScript to attach behavior to this UI element using DOM manipulation, document object modeling. And I think as a warm-up, what I would like to do is a very simple example where I would like to make the request button actually do something. And that something, as a warm-up, is going to be fetching this text from the UI, from the web as well, and then just printed it to the console. Just to make a simple example of how that works. And once we got that, what I will do is I will build the rest of the infrastructure to fetch the rest of the information, the API key, and then perform the request on the server, okay? So let's take a look at that. So how am I going to do that? The first thing that I want to do is I want to fetch the element, the actual node HTML element using JavaScript. So I'm going to create a variable that I'm going to call, for example, request button, I think. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say from the document, which is a variable that exists globally in the browser. From the document, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get an element by ID. And because the button had an ID attached to it, where is the button? The button here. Because we had this ID in the button, that is the way we have to target and say in the DOM, I want you to give me the element that has this particular ID. So I'm going to get an element by ID, and that ID is going to be button request. And so that we get some feedback, I'm going to print that button to the console, and if I save this, you can see that I get this representation of the button on the console. So this is working well, okay? Then the next thing is that once I press the button, I want to attach behavior. What that means is that what I can do is I can say to the request button, there are many properties that I can modify of this object, which is a DOM object, a DOM element, technically speaking. They're called elements. So what I can do is I can go to the on click, and you can see that this is a global event handler, which basically means that this is a function that fires when the user clicks the left mouse button on the object. Because this is a function, what I can do is I can override it and create my own function to customize the behavior of that click. And that click, for example, for starters, I'm going to say button was clicked, and I'm going to print that to the console. And right now I don't have anything, but if I click on the button, I can see that the button was clicked. So this button now does have functionality. It's doing something, right? Because I did attach that functionality by defining a function that I stored in the on-click event handler, all right? So what is the next thing that I want to do? What I would like to do here is once the button is being pressed, what I would like to do is I would like to take a look at the document, see what text do we have here, and print that text to the console. So what I'm going to do is something very simple as well. I'm going to create a variable that is going to be, for example, I'm going to call this the prompt. And I'm going to say document get element by ID. I'm going to get the text box. So I'm going to get the text area where this text is right now contained. You can see that the ID is text prompt. So I'm going to copy that. I'm going to get an element by ID text prompt. All right. And then I'm going to print to the console. But wait, so I'm going to print to the console the prompt. All right. But if I do this, you will see that what I'm printing, it's the text area element. But what I need is the actual text inside of the text area. So what I can do is I can access that by saying, well, instead of storing the full DOM element in the variable, I just want the value. I just want whatever someone has stored in this, someone has typed in this text area. Nope, I want value. Value. Oh my God, what is happening here? I want the value, all right? And if I do that, you can see that I now request, and what I get print is this. And I can style this a little bit. The text prompt is, and for example, I want to do single quotes, blah, 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 and as another single quote, or I can actually, so I can do that, you see, the text prompt, or I can do a little bit more of elegant JavaScript and say, well, I'm going to do text interpolation with the backslash, and I can say the text prompt is, and then double quotes, and here in double quotes, I use the dollar symbol and the open and close curly brackets to input a variable, and this will get serialized into a string. So this is called literal, string literals, or string interpolation, I forget. But it's basically, I get the request, and then boom, this gets printed to the console. All right, so that's it. We have the basics of what we need. We know now how to attach behavior to the button, and we know how to read values from the UI elements. So the only thing that we need to do is we need to complete the rest by reading all the values and then to create the request. So let me do the values and then we talk about how do we do the request. So for example, I'm going to say I need the key, right? So let me get the key, document get element by ID, and the ID was what? Where am I? API key. Okay, this was the ID of this content here. So I'm going to get the element by ID, API key dot value. All right, so that's one thing. And want, for example, to get how many images the user wants. I'm going to get the element by ID, and then that's going to be, where is this going to be? Image count. It's the ID. So I'm going to do image count, okay? But for this one, because the value of this text box is a string and I will need an actual number, what I would like to do here is I would like to forcefully cast this to a number. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the number object in JavaScript to take whatever was written here and convert it to a number. Okay? Sorry, the value. I'm forgetting this constantly. The value of this and converting it to a number. Now, for the size, it's going to be a little more involved because what we need to do basically is we need to make sure that only one of them is checked. That's correct. What we need to do is we basically need to load all the radios and then figure out which one is the one that is checked. So for example, I'm going to create a variable called radios, and then I'm going to get all the elements, get elements by name, and then the name for this one is going to be image size. All right. So with this, I will be getting all the elements. So you're going to see that if I print this to the console, I get 3 nodes, the first radio, the second radio, and the third radio. And you can see how they get highlighted in Chrome, correct? So now from this, what I need to do is write a for loop where for each one, I check which is the one that has the checked mark. And for example, I'm going to say let the size, and then I'm going to write for let I equals 0, I is less than radius.length, I plus plus. And then what I'm going to do is if radius dot if checked, if the checked property of the radio that I'm looking at is true, then can you please store the value of that number? Can you please store size? Here, size is going to be radius.I and then the value. Okay. Now I could turn this also into a number. Doesn't hurt, but since as per the API, what we need is to send a string composed, like I'm going to have to make up this string anyway. So it's kind of not necessary, but I'm just going to do it for the sake of the beauty of the code. And because we already found the one that is checked, we don't need to keep checking. So I want to break from the loop. I want to stop checking the rest of the radio elements. So, all right. So I think we have what we want. So let's make an object like this one so that we can print it to the console and make sure that we have the right element that we're going to send as part of the request. So let me write here, the body of the request is going to be this element that is going to have a prompt, and that's going to be the value of the prompt, all right? And actually in modern JavaScript, I could just simply write this, and because the name of the variable is the same name of the key, it would work, but I'm just going to be a little more verbose here. The prompt property is going to be the value of the prompt here. Then the number n, how many images I'm getting, is going to be the value of count. And then the size is going to be equal to a text that I'm going to create. It's going to be size plus the X symbol plus size again. All right? Beautiful. And one last thing, as per the reference, you remember that the response format could be either an URL to where the image was created, or it could be the actual data of the image, a base 64. In previous videos, we used this option, the base 64, because we wanted to get that data and save it as a file in our file system. But because we are working on a web app, the web app can very easily display images that are living somewhere remotely. So for this one, I'm actually going to use the URL option because it's a little easier. And because this is the default, I don't really need to specify it. So this would give me an URL, but just to make sure, I'm going to be a little verbose, okay? This is unnecessary because it's a default, but we're just gonna do it like this, okay? And then let's print to the console, let's print the request body to see if we were able to fetch all the data properly. So, okay, so I'm going to type this, and this is going to be this many elements, and 2014. And if I do a request, you can see that the request now has here an object that is the amount of elements, the prompt, the response format, and the size of which matches real well what the API needs. Oh, where did I go? Okay, which matches really well this object. Okay, so I think we're ready to make the actual request. Are you excited about this? How are we going to do this? How are we going to connect our web app with the OpenAI API? How are we going to make that request? Well, if you remember, we have a video in this playlist where we did the same thing using Node.js. And Node.js is a framework that is JavaScript based. So, and many of the APIs and many of the techniques are going to be exactly the same. So I strongly recommend that if you're not familiar with how to do this, that you check our Node.js app for Dall-E first. A link to the video should be popping up somewhere on the corner, or on the corner, or there will be something in the description here. Hello, Jose, beep, 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 beep. But basically, the idea is that this is the code of the Node app without using the JS, the Node module, which is kind of why I wanted to do it from scratch. So the idea is that before we get the request, we need to figure out the key, which we already have. We need to figure out the Dall-E endpoint, which is going to be the same. We have the request body, so we already have a JSON file with all the parameters and all the options that we want to send. And then what we need to do is we need to build an object that is going to be the parameters of the request. So remember, we need to make a post request to this endpoint here. We need to pass the key as part of the authorization, and we need to pass the body with the information that we want. And then what we will do is we're going to use the fetch API to make an asynchronous request, one that pings the endpoint with the parameters that we want. And then once that is done, which typically takes some time, and JavaScript keeps doing its thing, then we will take the response, we will serialize it to JSON, and then with that response, we will do something. whatever that is. Okay. So what is that going to look like? So we do have the key here. We don't have the endpoint. So I'm going to copy and paste this like that, literally. So I'm going to do here, the Dall-E endpoint is going to be that value, and it's going to be constant as well. I don't need to get any more sophisticated than that. I'm going to delete the request here. I'm just going to comment it out. Okay. And then here for the parameters of the request, I'm literally going to copy the same thing here. So I'm going to copy and paste here request parameters. So it's going to be post. I'm going to get the key from the value that I got before. And then I'm going to stringify the request body because this is a JSON object. And in the request, I can only pass a string value. So that's why I need to take the JSON object and stringify it. And once I have the request parameters, I can use the fetch API to say, I want to query the Dall-E endpoint with these request parameters. Okay. So that starts an asynchronous request. And then what I want to do is asynchronous requests in JavaScript return promises. Promises means like an object that will trigger some actions once the effects of the object have been resolved, I think is a technical word. So what that means is that this fetch returns a promise, and to that promise I can attach a behavior to say, then whenever the promise is fulfilled, then take the response that is going to be given and take that response, and the first thing we're going to do is we're going to serialize it to a JSON object. We're going to serialize the body to a JSON object. And then, because that operation is also asynchronous and also returns a promise, which is kind of weird, but it is what it is, I am going to add also some behavior to that. And I'm going to say, whenever I get the JSON object, can you please just console log it to the console just for the start, just to make sure that this is working so far. Okay. So what are we going to do? I'm going to keep this as it is, detail, prompt, etc., etc. I'm going to make a request, and then boom, I get an error. So I get an error here. I'm going to print the error to the console. The error is invalid API key. All right, so this is not a valid API key. I need to actually put a real API key there. So I'm going to copy and paste my API key. All right. So now I'm going to do the request again. Request. All right. And then the request is and you see that it took some time, but it did created data, and then I get an URL, and then maybe I can copy that URL and remove the double quotes and see if well, it's a very long, and the URL, and boom, I did get the request. I got an image. Okay. Woohoo! So it's working. Woohoo! Nice. Okay, beautiful. But of course, this is a web app, so it should display the results in here, correct? So what I want to do now is, sorry, I'm actually going to hard code this for the time being for development. So here, I'm just going to write the API key right here. No, sorry, this is not the complete API key. I think it should be something like this. That's the API key? No, that's not the API key. This is the complete API key. Exactly. There you go. So I'm going to copy and paste this. I'm just going to keep it here so that I can reload, and then I will just change my API key at some point after I make this video. Okay. So what are we going to do now? We're going to improve this code a little bit, and we're going to say, well, just like before, what we did was, for the response, was we gave the last promise handler, we gave it a function so that whenever the resolution of JSON came in, this function was a function that was going to take that JSON data and do something with that data. In the Node app, what we used the function was to save a file with the image to the file system. In this case, what we will want to do is we will want to attach those images visually here to the app so that we can render them. Okay? So how is that going to look like? Well, let's create a function. For example, here, I'm going to call this function add images to the web app. And I'm going to take some JSON data as an input. Okay? So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to replace here this, and I'm going to give it the function. So that because the function is a function that takes JSON data, it's going to be the same as what we had before. I'm actually going to just copy and paste this. I'm going to comment it out so that we do have the option to debug, add images here. Okay? And then if I do this and I print the JSON data, it's basically the same thing as we had before. So I'm going to try to make a request here. I press the request, and then it's taking some time, but you see it resolves. It gives me an URL here, which I could ping, etc., etc. Okay, beautiful. So what am I going to do now? What I'm going to do is, because remember, we can create, because remember the structure of the result was something along these lines. Remember, an object that has the timestamp of when it was created and has a data property with an array of all the URLs, because it can be 1, 2, 3, or 4. So what I would like to do is I would like to write a for loop that goes over all the elements in the data array, and then it attaches them as images here in my container. So that's going to be pretty easy, let's say. So I'm going to write here a for loop, all right? I equals 0, I is going to be less than the element inside of the data property. So json.data.data.length, all right? And I plus plus. And then I'm going to, for example, what are we going to do? I'm going to say, well, let me take the data. For example, let image URL is going to be equal to JSON data dot data, and then the object, and then the URL property. All right. So if that's the case, then what I can do now is, and this is probably a constant because I'm not going to change that. So what I can do now is I can create a new DOM element from scratch, which is going to be an image. So I'm going to say image node is going to be, for example, document.create element. And the element is going to be of the type image, right? The image, the source property, the one that tells what image is going to display, is going to be equal to the image URL. So that URL that we fetched from here. And then what we're going to do is to the container, we want to attach that image here in this container. This container, we need to retrieve it. But instead of retrieving it, perhaps every time we do this for loop, maybe we just want to make a global variable here and say const container. I'm going to call this image container. It's going to be document.getElementById, by ID, and this is probably image container. Is that what it was? Let me double check. Image container, exactly. Beautiful. So to the image container, whenever we create this image, what I want to do is I want to append this image node that I just created. Okay. Are we ready for this? Wait. Let me minimize this a little bit. So I'm going to do a request, and that's going to be the isometric blah, 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 right? And I do get an image. And now I'm going to say, for example, crazy monkey and 2 images. And I'm going to request this. And what's going to happen? And I get the 2 images. And now parametric model. And then another 2 images here. And then what's going to happen? Ta-da-da, ta-da-da. Oh, look at those parametric models. Woohoo, crazy, nice. Okay, and of course, This you can save as an image, you can open in a new tab, and then you go to the actual original URL, etc., etc. Okay. Now, all right, so one thing that I'm going to modify is, you saw how as we added requests, the images started showing up after the previous ones. I don't like that because I feel that if you're creating a new request, the images should show on the top. So instead of using append, I'm going to actually use prepend, all right? And if I save this, I'm going to create the image, and then I'm going to create like YouTube streamer, right? And then I'm going to request, and hopefully the one is going to show up before this one. Okay, you're right. This one showed up right before. Okay, beautiful. This is working. Hooray! Na na na. Beautiful. Before we wrap this up, I would like to do something, which is, if you noticed, I created this UI section where I said request status, which is not doing anything right now. And I think, especially for web apps, and especially for web apps that take some time to execute, like for example, the crazy monkey, you can see that I press the button and it does take some time for the request to fulfill and for the image to show up. And that time is time that the user is left hanging and they don't really know if something is happening, if it's not happening, if it went through, if it's working. And they may feel like, oh, this is blocked or whatever, and they may start like pressing the button over and over and over, which is very bad UX experience. So something that is typically very good for web apps is to give some kind of feedback about what's going on behind the scenes. So you can see that we had this text here that says no request performed yet. So what we could do is every time something happens in our app, what we could do is we could give some feedback to the user to inform of what's happening. So for example, the way that would be is, first of all, we're going to fetch this text and have it somewhere here so that we can refresh it and change it, etc., etc. So if you remember, this was the request status paragraph. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to say const request status is going to be document.getElementById, and it's going to be the request status object. Okay. And what I would like to do is, anytime that something meaningful in my app happens, I would like to use this to put some feedback. So for example, every time we click on request, I probably want to display here like, hey, performing request, like something is happening. So every time someone hits the button, what I would like to do is I would like to say request status dot, and for this one, I'm going to use the inner HTML property because it is a paragraph. So I want to change the inner HTML here. For this, I'm going to say the inner HTML, I want to replace that with a message called performing request and some dots so that we feel like, oh, time is passing of sorts, right? So if I now request the image, you can see that as soon as I press request, this is going to change. Performing request, so that's good feedback. Even if we had like a tiny animation, like, ooh, like a tiny progress bar, I'm going to leave that up to you. And then this shows up. And when this shows up, I probably also want some feedback, correct? So what am I going to do? So I'm going to write here, when this gets fulfilled, I'm going to say request status dot inner HTML, and that's going to be successfully retrieved. No, this is a typo, retrieved, and then for JSON data.length, this many images. All right. I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to request 2 images here. I'm going to request, and you can see performing request, and whenever the images show up, then this is going to change. So it's actually retrieved 2 images. All right, this is great. This is awesome. Beautiful. So, and then you can see that if I press the button again, it already changes to performing request, and it will get me back another image, right? Another image here that gets prepended. It goes to the beginning, which is also great. So this is working really good right now. But what I would like to do also is to be able to handle errors. So for example, let's say that the user forgets to add their API key, or they enter a wrong API key. What's going to happen is that I'm going to make the request, boom, and I get an error. The error shows up in the console, but of course you cannot expect people in the console to understand, you know. And so we got an error here that was part of, so this is not working great. So the first thing that I would like to do is I would like to make sure that if we get any error, that error is shown up here on the images, okay? On the images. So what I can do is in the fetch API, what we can do is we can add a last clause where we say, well, if any of the things above fail, can you please catch the error? All right? Can you please catch the error? And then in the error, can you print that error to my status bar? So for example, request status dot inner dot, I'm defining a function here, inner HTML. Can that be the text of the error? Can you please do that? So that's going to be one thing, okay? So that's one. I'm going to now change this, perform a request, and boom. Type error cannot read properties of undefined. What does that mean? Well, it means that the fetch, what has failed is actually add images here. And because add images was part of the promise handling, this triggered the error here. But this has failed because what I'm receiving, let me show you what I'm receiving. Console log, JSON data. What I'm receiving for this request, which is valid, it's working well as a post request. It's just that the server is not accepting it because it has an invalid key. But I am receiving an error on an object called error with a message of what the error is, you know? The problem is that because I'm trying to loop over the data properties of what I'm receiving, because this object does not have a data property, that's causing an error that is triggering this catch. So what I can do here is I can also add some error handling inside of JSON data and say, well, if in my JSON data I found that there is an error, right? So if this value is truthy, then what I can do is I can print here to the request status. What I can do is I can print, for example, error, and then what is the error that I'm getting? So JSON data.error.message. Okay, because you can see that inside of the JSON object we have error and we have message. All right, and I can stop. I don't do anything else because I don't want to continue and print any successful stuff. I don't want to for loop over this because there's not a valid object, etc., etc. So I'm going to save this. I'm going to remove my or mess with my API key, and then I'm going to try to make a request. And you can see that, oh, error, incorrect API key was provided. So this is working great so far, and it's not generating an image. Let me reload this. I have the right API now, but I'm going to request, for example, 0.5 images, which shouldn't be the case. You see, the server is already telling me that 0.5 is not valid. Okay, so I can't do that. Or if I type 0, then 0 is less than the minimum, which is 1, which is also not a valid request. Okay, so this is great because I'm giving the user some feedback on what's going on. All right, this is very, very good practice for any web app that you write. Okay, beautiful. What are we doing now? So how are we going to wrap this up? Well, I think the best thing we can do is, if we made a web app, can we actually upload it somewhere to the web and make it live in the space and other people to use it? So what we're going to do is, well, first of all, I have this website called parametric.camp with this placeholder which I never use. Wait. Oh, my hair was so much darker back at the time. Oh my God, I'm aging so much. Anyway, so what I would like to do is something where I can say, for example, parametric.camp.Dall-E, right? And then access the app as a sub module or as a sub page in my website, if you will. So what I'm going to do is I am under control of my website. So I can use, for example, FTP. I'm not going to explain this, but if you're into basic web programming, I do have a hosting where I can point to the web folder using FTP. I can access the files in my server using FTP. I have the basic website that I've described. And then what I can do is I can just simply add here a new directory. I'm going to call this Dall-E, right? And you can see that I have this folder now, and I can upload these files to the Dall-E folder. But before we do that, I'm actually going to change something, because remember, I have hard-coded here for developing. I have hard-coded my API key, so I don't want that to go to the public and everyone using it. So I want your API key here, right? So that people that access this have to actually input their API. So this is what I would like to upload. So now what I can do is, because these files have been updated, I can go inside the Dall-E folder and upload this tiny project that I just did, the Web Dall-E app. And you can see that because I uploaded it to my server now, if I go back and I refresh this route parametriccamp.dall-E, I have now my web app. And if I click on request, I'm getting like, oh, this is not correct. You have to input your real API. So I'm going to now copy my API. I'm going to press it here. And this is going to be a request. And actually, anyone now can access this. So if any of you folks, for example, I'm recording this live, so anyone that can go here and use this, am I going to take it down? Am I not going to take it down? I can probably just leave it here. There's no reason why people should not be able to use this. Okay, anyway, so I'm going to, I guess, leave this here. Yes, I'm probably going to leave this here. There's going to be a link in the description of this video to this app if you want to try it yourself. But yes, long story short, this could be on your website. This could be on a GitHub Pages repository. This could be anywhere, and it could be super interesting for people to use. Okay, so beautiful. I think with this video, success recording of a Dall-E web app on YouTube. And with this video, we're going to celebrate the completion of this by generating an image that is going to be, whoa! Yay! So that's what Dall-E thinks that this should be about. Okay, well, if you made it all the way to the end of this video, thank you. We were very excited about being here and about making our first web app in this channel, I guess, but also to show you how these techniques, access to AI tools, etc., can be very easily wrapped into web apps that can be used by anyone. So now this can go on your website. You can impress your potential employers like, hey, I made this thing. You know, you can generate images. You can do many things. You can now work with how these images are embedded. You can display them. You can now paint on them. There's many things you can expand from here. Okay, but I'm going to leave that up to you, creative audience, to figure out how can we expand on this technique. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you for being here. If you liked this content, maybe consider liking this video, subscribing to the channel, hitting the like button, saying hi on the comments, joining the Discord server, or any other thing that may please you to become more integrated in our community. Until then, thank you very much, and I may see you on the next video, in which I think I'm going to do what we just did here for Dall-E and image generation, but instead I'm going to write a small app to talk to the text completion API in OpenAI and do like chat GPT kind of interaction. Okay, if you're interested in that, in writing your own chat GPT, make sure to check our next video. Thank you. Bye bye.